So Alison, am I okay to pass on to you and for you to introduce your project? And again, just tell me what to do with the tech.
Okay, well, thanks, Naomi. That was a great lead in for me. As I said earlier, I'm not an artist. I'm actually an experimental psychologist who's interested in the irrational way that we all behave. So thinking and behavior is kind of what I study. But for the last 6 years, I think it is, I've been working off and on with two socially engaged artists, Pip Wolf here in Wales and Kirsty, who lives in Bristol. And obviously over lockdown, we've been working with each other remotely. We haven't, in fact, we're going to meet next week for the first time, which is exciting. So we formed a group, Larks and Ravens, and we meet from time to time. A lot of our stuff is doing making and drawing as a way of understanding how crazy the world is. And then occasionally doing things in the world. We worked at Newport Victorian Market on a stall for a month. We've run various other events where effectively what we're trying to do, and it's similar to the surreal thing, but it's like trying to find a way to present the world back to people in such a way that actually they realize how irrational it is. Because that's the problem, is that we just accept the world as it is. And in fact, it is pretty crazy. And if you can just get for a moment people to see that, it really has an effect. So that's why I work with artists, is because I think artists really are great at irrationality. The very thing of drawing, making, performing is in some sense irrational. It breaks you out of the analytical, rational way of thinking. So we focus on social issues and environmental issues, but for about 3 or maybe even more longer now, we got kind of found ourselves drawn to explore the relationship between value and money. And it's ridiculous. It is so distorted, almost to the point that the two things have nothing to do with each other. So we've done all sorts of ways of trying to understand that and play that back to people. And that, I suppose, inevitably led us to look at universal basic income, partly because one of the artists that I work with at least has to do odd jobs behind bars or working on a till in a garden centre in order to like pay the mortgage and feed herself. And that means she's often not available to do actually much more important work, art. And, you know, that seems such a shame. And the more and more I meet people who are in that category, who actually aren't able to work on the things that really are socially and environmentally much more important, because they have to make a living. So that's how I got interested in UBI. So basically, it was really around the start of lockdown last year that we started looking more closely at UBI as a group. And what interested us was the kind of the questions behind it, the things that block people from accepting it. So we've talked about some of those already. One of the ones we get, actually, Andy, if you could put up the questions, that would be, these are just examples. So these are the kinds of questions. We actually came up with 20 of them that are underpinning UBI. So what is a citizen of the UK worth? What activities should we be paid for? Is it one's social duty to get a paid job? What kinds of income are deserved? The thing I said earlier, income that you get while you're sleeping, is that deserved? What would you do if you had an independent income? What's the role of education? So lots of questions like that. So if you could just pause there for a minute. Yeah. So in trying to come at these questions from a different direction, we wanted to explore irrational approaches to them. So in fact, what we did while we were working on Zoom remotely is we randomly picked one question. One of us picked a question just by pointing a finger, whilst one of the others of the three of us picked up an object that happened to be in the room. And the exercise we then went through was to draw and study that object, but with the question at the back of our minds, and just see what happened. And so if you go to the next page for me, Andy. Right, so one of the ones, I've only picked two to talk about here, is the question, is it one's social duty to get a paid job? And the object that Kirsty had picked up was actually a tube of skin cream. And the one I had was labeled allergenics. And I drew it, I studied it. I actually went for a walk, taking it with me to have a look at. And the thing that struck me was the things that are written on these tubes of face cream that are all about, this is going to solve your problem. And the more I thought about it, I thought, yeah, that's what the government pumped us, is everybody, if everybody had a job, you know, we wouldn't have food banks, we wouldn't have problems. So it's your social duty to get a job, to things. Having a job will make you feel better. It'll improve your appearance. It'll improve how you look to other people. If you walk into a room and people ask you, you'll look better if you've got a job. And there's just so many ways in which that felt like the same. If you have a skin problem, is like it's kind of your duty to try and look better, feel better, and make other people feel better because you look better. So then if we go on to the next page, I actually have a very, very large thing of E45 moisturizing cream, one of those monster ones that you can like pump out the stuff. And I was drawing that and thinking about the politicians who say we just need to create lots and lots of jobs. And it's like, if we had lots of jobs, then everything would be fixed. And if, like me, you've ever had a skin complaint of any sort, none of these things actually work. So it's getting a job is not a panacea to the problems that we have. But somehow we're living in this myth that it's your social duty to actually get a paid job. So that was one. And then the second example is the question was, what would you do if you had an independent income? One of the questions we already talked about. And the object in this case was a sellotape dispenser, which, as you can see, I'm not an artist. I didn't do a very good job of drawing it. But the nice thing about drawing is it makes you focus on something without using all your rational mind. But as I kind of focused on drawing it, I thought, do you know what's really nice? This was actually my own sellotape dispenser. It's got a really heavy base. And what's really nice is it makes it really useful for dispensing sellotape because it's got this solid base to it. So you can now do anything you like with the sellotape because you've got a solid base. And it just struck me that that's what universal basic income's like, is it gives you that solid base. So now you can be sellotape. So if we go on to the next one, I then went on to like imagining that I was sellotape and I'm on a roll and what am I going to do? And I just found it. So I wrote all these things and then I stuck them in sellotape on a piece of paper and realized that there were just lots of things I could do if I was sellotape. I could create something. I could just have fun sticking things. I could look for opportunities to be useful. I could make connections between things. I could just be sticky and free. I could make a big sign. I could mend things. I could make something better. I could learn how to be stickier or differently sticky. I could look for some paper to collaborate with. and I wouldn't need to be threatened by glue. I could do other things. So it was just, that one was just very freeing, and realizing, yeah, that's what we need. Is if you've got a solid base, you can now focus on what are the things that I can contribute to society, that I can do, that are particular to me, that I enjoy, that are creative. So yeah, when I talk to people, discuss about UBI with anyone, I'm sort of done with those now, Andy. Well, like other people have said, they come up with the same objections, and they think that those are rational arguments. Now, I know from the psychology that I do that actually they're not. The rational stuff is the stuff you come out with to justify something that you're threatened by, or that actually, you know, underlying, you think that a lot of people don't really deserve to have an income at all. You do, but other people don't. They'll just waste it. They'll just think that actually it's important to have a job, you know. So I read there was an article about 3 years ago written by a Conservative MP saying that it's actually the objection that Conservatives should have to UBI is that it's morally wrong, which was like, morally wrong? And that's because he actually believed that writing poetry, listening to music is not what life's about. It's about actually making a contribution and having a paid job. And so the problem is, when people are couching the objections to UBI in those rational terms, we too get caught into addressing them rationally with rational arguments, and it sort of gets us nowhere. So having gone through this creative process, we, Larks and Ravens that I work with, we are trying to think, we haven't got there yet, of is there some way that we can employ these other things, and a bit like Naomi's talking about as well, that cut through the rationality, that bounce people out of the rationality to actually see the world in a moment slightly differently. Could we use drawing? Could we get them to act irrationally, you know, do something they thought was absolutely crazy? What do you mean I'm going to draw a sellotape dispenser? I thought I was here to talk about UBI. You know, it's how you do that. Maybe you do need to dress up in strange clothes to do it. I don't know. But I just feel very strongly from a psychology point of view that there's something in that. There's something in actually getting people to behave irrationally as a way of getting them to see how irrational the world is. And therefore, bizarrely, how much something like UBI makes sense in an irrational world. So that's where I'm at.
That's fantastic, Alison. A really, you know, again, great presentation, really clear, sort of nicely, sort of to bring in the actual practice as well as kind of like the ideas around it, and very articulate around the kind of, yeah, the thinking behind it as well, which I think is really useful actually. Just this sort of, well, yeah, the again, I don't know if I need to sort of recap on those things. You did a very good job with concluding at the end, but yeah, this idea of kind of breaking people's sort of habit or habitual sort of way of thinking about things, and kind of creating this rupture to get them to see the world in a slightly different way, I think is, you know, something where, yeah, again, we've maybe not sort of talked about it so much within the UBI Lab Arts groups at the moment, but yeah, that's a great thing that art can do, isn't it? Help people see the world in a different way. So it's brilliant to bring that into it. So I just wanted to I'll pass it, open it up to questions for everyone else as well, but just to sort of clarify for me, because I'm also taking the notes. So those exercises, the kind of the idea of kind of, yeah, working with the object or drawing the object or sort of dwelling on the object, and then sort of allowing that to kind of create this series of free association conversations. That was done within your group, or have you opened that up to other?
Yeah, no, well, we haven't met physically as a three. We're going to meet next week, and that'll be the first time in well, nearly over a year. Actually, we did meet twice, I think, in the autumn last year, in a rather strange socially distant large space, which didn't really work, not if you're going to make things and work together. So effectively, yeah. And so the objects were actually whatever object, somebody came up with an object, but then you had to go and find your own face cream or sellotape dispenser. So they were actually slightly different. But that added to it, really. So we did the exercise for a few hours, and then we'd come back together and talk about what we discovered from that.
Fantastic. But yeah, but maybe perhaps, and is the next stage to sort of open that out to more people, or it could be something that is the next.
Don't know. We have all the time, every now and then we want to go and do something in the world, and we go and do that, and we're kind of toying with what makes sense to do in the world around this. And in fact, we're going to go away together for a week in 5 days in June to work on exactly that. So, yeah.
Great. But even as a sort of, as an exercise and just produce it, because I mean, obviously whoever's sort of able to, ground their thinking around universe-based income or sort of like work subjectivity around a roll of sellotape or hand cream, there's some poetry in that I think is, would be really useful for other people to use as well. Are there any kind of questions or comments from other people in the group about it, or any?
And I think getting people to think about the questions through an object is a really nice way of doing it. And like, yeah, I think the people's comments were, I would agree with just things like, yeah, how do I'm not threatened by glue and things like that. I think that was just like a really nice way of thinking about it. And again, it's just that bringing it down to sort of everyday kind of interaction, things which are familiar, but just making them slightly, defamiliarizing them slightly, just, again, it's just that shift, isn't it? And I think, like you said, with the comment about people earning money just from sleeping, I mean, I've used the same thing. I think someone else put inheritance as a kind of like, yeah, that's money for nothing, isn't it? And all those kinds of things. So I think it's just, but yeah, I guess the object way is just another way of taking it. It's not a personal attack on them or people who've had, who've had big inheritances or whatever, or been born into money. I think it's a nice way of taking that thing. But yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to see how you could get other people to do it, because I know it's the I think like with Noemi's project, I think the weakness and strength of that is that it's such an immediate, short sort of thing, and then most people walking down the street aren't going to sort of spend, or don't have time to sit down and do a drawing and think about this kind of like creative sort of thing. So, but it's like, yeah, getting the people in the room and getting them to sit down and then engage with it. And and I'm sure like the people who we really need to do it aren't the people who are going to go to an art workshop, but it's that kind of, but I think the playful everyday nature of it can sort of hopefully cut through a little bit, even just that thing of, just getting people to think about it in a slightly different way, or it's something you could share on social media where, I guess it's because it is everyday objects, it is a language which everyone understands, and just sort of attaching those questions to it. Or questions like, especially now, I think after the pandemic, people's ideas, we'd like to think, but people's ideas of what counts as essential work or valuable work has widened out from before it was pre-pandemic. But maybe it does feel like that window is closing a little bit, but yeah, maybe this is a good way of opening it back up.
People are very threatened by drawing. One of the things that we did is we turned up, this is a couple of years ago now, at the main NatWest Bank in Bristol, and asked if we could just sit and draw for an hour. And they went and got the manager down from upstairs, and he said no. And we said, why? And it was because there was a danger of us drawing something that we shouldn't.
Yeah.
So we went then to the big Lloyd's building in Bristol, which is a huge modern building. And we could only get as far as the sort of lobby. And so we decided there, like that was a slightly public space, that we'd just sit and start drawing. And they came and threw us out. So yeah, drawing is, it's almost like at some level they recognize that it is quite threatening. It might lead to something that you don't want to know. I mean, when I say drawing, we were drawing on our own note art books. It's not like we were drawing on the walls or anything. We were actually just drawing. So interesting.
Yeah, it's amazing just how something very, very simple can seem so subversive, but I think it also just shows you how I mean, it just exposes how controlled the sort of public space is now. That thing of like even just shopping centres or whatever. Yeah, just that thing of like if you look suspicious, or basically if you're not buying stuff, it's kind of like move them on quick.
Yeah.
So yeah, okay. I'm going, Noemi. Yes.
I just wanted to say that I really liked the object. I really liked the cream, the way it looked. And this is probably very almost disgustingly Stalinist of me to say, but if you ever did that to a shop and went and wrote on all of the products or stuff like that, I would be hurrying to that shop to buy the product with the propaganda on them, with the funny, surreal propaganda on them. So let me know if you do that. Also, I have so many questions that I don't even know where to begin with the whole psychology and how did that lead you into thinking about UBI specifically?
It probably requires, I don't know, is my email, I'm happy to make my email available. I can put it on the chat if you want to ask more about it. Basically, as I talked about, that actually we were kept stumbling over money and value and how strange it was, and that kind of led us to thinking about universal basic income. So yeah, as a psychologist, I'm just fascinated by these really bizarre, well, as you dig into things, you discover how bizarre they are. So I tend to notice those and then kind of welly in there and want to know more, understand them.
But I think that's a nice invitation, Alison. I think, yeah, sort of, if we do want to, because these are quite short sessions, I suppose.
I'll put it on the.
It'd be great to kind of, sort of go a bit deeper into any of these things, or pick up on them, and in future sessions. I think if there's some themes that are coming up, it'd be brilliant. I mean, we'll sort of move on. I think to the in-kind project, just because I know we were hoping to sort of tie up around sort of 8 o'clock with the presentations, but I just wanted to sort of make a comment. The bit that I thought was really great about the approach is to sort of is to do that sort of judo move when kind of someone presents you with the rational argument against it and say, well, what's normal about working? It's kind of that sort of that idea about someone saying, oh well, if you gave people money, they would sit around doing nothing all day, and the idea to almost counter that with, well, what's wrong with that? Is to sort of break the sort of the capitalist subjectivity for a moment and kind of get people to sort of think in a different way. I think is interesting. I know that we might sort of have a kind of counter kind of position from the kind of in-kind project that might sort of think about UBI, something that might work differently with that, or have a different relationship to kind of work in general. So I think it would be great to sort of use that as a bridge to pass on and kind of keep the conversation going. So Janie and